Angela, can you see the screen?
Yes, I can. And I was going to ask, is there a way to get a copy of these slides, like emailed or printed at the end of all this?
No, but Alexis has it on video. Or on
Okay.
tape, right?
So we can rewatch it anytime.
Yeah, so right now they are just on the computer at the library, but I'm working on getting them up on our YouTube channel.
Oh,
so
great.
as soon as that happens, I will send out a link. Probably on the last day, I'll send out a link to the YouTube channel where they'll all be available.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to take a second here. I'll be right back. I want to see if there's a video on CNN that I saw the other day that might still be there. It's pretty interesting. Interesting little tidbit. This is a commercial, of course. This is about handling bees.
Okay.
The family who lived here wanted to save the bees, so they called me.
Now watch how she puts this in.
A lot of what I do is, keeping bees for folks who want bees on their property but don't necessarily want to be beekeepers themselves. But I also do a lot of live bee removals and offer educational opportunities for folks.
Wow.
I thought you'd like that, It can be done.
In general, most honeybees don't want to sting you. So I hope that, by people watching these videos, maybe they can look at bees a different way or learn something new about bees. Bees are like other creatures. They'll send you signals and signs to communicate with you, just like, maybe your dog will if he or she is scared. And they'll put their ears back and tuck their tail. And bees will send you signs like that too to let you know how they're feeling.
See, that's the packet she's shaking into the box.
Okay.
There are simple things that everybody can do to help bees, from planting pollinator-friendly plants to, letting the weeds go in your garden, to choosing organic produce when you can. And they're vital to our existence and to our ecosystems.
So I thought you might enjoy that.
That's incredible.
My great-great-uncle, he went missing in 1930.
Okay, so we're back to my PowerPoint slides. This is pretty interesting. We stopped here on nutrition when I said water was the most important thing you could get. And of course, over the summer, we'll talk about how protein and carbohydrates have to be diversified. Pollen can't be just from one source. Spring sugar feeding is in a ratio 1-to-1 sugar to water, granulated sugar. And then fall sugar is 2-to-1, and that's because it's a little thicker and they don't have to dehydrate the substance as much. So if you're going to put pollen in early, like some people are starting to put it in here in March, early April, you need to continue it because they'll take that pollen, the queen will start laying eggs, the nurse bees will start making worker jelly for the larva, and then if they run out, of course, the larva will all die. And I said there's always a but, and this is just perfect timing because this is March. The pictures I'm going to show you are from March. And you notice that what was it, a few days ago, it was 65 degrees. And yesterday, of course, we had an inch of snow and ice, and today it's been pretty rotten. So this is my mistake in March a couple of years ago. Lots of bees there, lots and lots of bees, right? You can see them all. And here's looking, the bottom left picture here is looking down into the brood box. And then of course the big clump there are the bees on the bottom brood box. All of these bees are dead. Everyone. They all starved to death. You can see the comb here is totally empty on the bottom left picture. I put a sugar board out on these like I do on all my hives, and it was early March, nice warm day. I went out, checked, put sugar out for them. It was a very vibrant, thriving hive yet. And then we got a snowstorm, and we got cold weather that lasted like 10 days. Now, I didn't bother to go out during those 10 days to see how they were doing. And as soon as it got warm, I went out, and they had all starved to death because they ate all their food. My mistake. I still feel bad about it. It was a great hive, as you can see. It was just really thriving, and happens every March because the weather is so changeable. So in March, you always have to worry about whether you're feeding your bees, whether they have enough food. So most of this course is how the mechanics are how you put bees into a box and what type of woodenware you buy and what kind of housing you make for them. But the real thing to keeping livestock, which bees are, is how you inspect and what you look for during the inspections. And I'm going to try to answer that because you need to inspect once a week in the early part of the year here. And then in the summer, you can stretch it out to maybe 10, 12 days. And these are the questions you need to ask when you're doing an inspection on a hive. Do you have all the stages of brood? Because hives are very dependent on tasks. Worker bees have specific tasks based on their age. Young bees are nurse bees, middle-aged bees do hive tasks, and older bees do foraging. Hive tasks can be cleaning, can be, they have such a thing called the undertaker bee, whose job is to take dead bees out of the hive. And they have guard bees at the front door. All specific jobs that people have figured out that bees do at different ages of their life. Do you have enough adult bees? Meaning, do you have enough foragers? The demographics of a hive are very important. You can have tons and tons of adult bees, and the hive can be in trouble because you don't have enough brood. Okay, so we'll get into that. What condition is the queen? Is she big? Is she skinny? Are the other bees taking care of her? Is she laying both fertilized and unfertilized eggs? What stressors do you have? And stressors are pests, pesticides, insecticides, mites, moths, different beetles. So what's stressing the hive? Does the hive have enough water close by, and does it have enough food? And of course, is there enough space? Because there's always a competition for space between the queen and the foragers. You should keep records, some type of record keeping to document the inspection. I will send, once everybody gets back on, I'm hoping tomorrow or Thursday rather, I'll get everybody's email and then I can send you a paper copy or electronic copy of a paper copy of an inspection sheet that will give you some ideas of how to keep track of your inspections. Legal considerations. Most restrictive regulations are the result of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. As you saw from the little clip I had, honeybees are defensive and not aggressive. Wasps and hornets are aggressive. And the education is the answer to overly restrictive regulations. In North Liberty, you can keep backyard chickens, but you can't keep honeybees. In Iowa City, you can keep honeybees. You can keep any bees except it'll come to me. It's a bee that's from South America, and it's invading the U.S. And for some reason, my mind just went blank, but it's a bad bee. Johnson County bees are considered, I think I may have a slide on that. Nope. Johnson County, the bees are considered livestock. All right. This is an important website. It's called Fieldwatch.com. It's run by a private organization for lots of states, one of which is Iowa. And what it does is you can register your beehive. And you can see the beehives here have a radius indicator around them of 1 mile. So wherever there's a beehive that's registered, the red circle is a 1 mile radius. What's important about this is it's about the state law for pesticide applicators. And I believe I have that on the next slide. Let's see, no. Okay, so someplace in here I have a slide on pesticide applications. You can't, commercial pesticide operators cannot apply pesticide within 1 mile of a registered beehive between like 6 in the morning and 6 at night. All right, that doesn't include farmers because they're allowed to do it, or private citizens. They, in houses, they can do it from themselves. This is for commercial applicators. Plus, it gives you a tool to see who else has beehives around your house. There's quite a few that you wouldn't necessarily know. Since 2017, there's an antibiotic called Terramycin, and you can use it on bees for a foul brood disease. Works very well. Problem is they restricted its use, so now to get it, you have to get a veterinary feed directive, which they typically use with cattle or hogs, and you can get that form off the internet. And you just change wherever it says, cows or cattle or hogs, and put in bees. You adapt it for bees. And I know the Animal Kingdom in North Liberty is familiar with this because I've used them. They will sign off on it, and then you can send it in to a supplier of Terramycin, and they will ship you the Terramycin that you can use for your hive. Convoluted process, obviously. They just didn't want antibiotics being sold to beekeepers and then being used on cattle or hogs. So Animal Kingdom North Liberty is familiar with it. I've talked to the vets down there a couple times. And it's good stuff if you have foul brood. Bee stings are a problem that you can't get away from. You won't get stung by a bee. you notice the lower right is a stinger of a bee. I have my dog bothering me here. And what happens is the worker bee will leave its stinger in you. She will go off and die. You see the venom sac there, and that will pulsate and actually push venom, squeeze venom into you. So as you get stung, you want to have your hive tool or some type of scraper and scrape that stinger off as soon as possible. Don't squeeze it. If you squeeze it, obviously you're going to be squeezing venom into yourself, but scrape it off. And if you do that within a couple seconds, you'll lessen the amount of venom that you get into your system. Africanized bees, that's which ones are the aggressive. Africanized bees were in southern Florida, Texas, Arizona. They're slowly moving northward. They won't get to Iowa because they are not tolerant at all of cold weather. So they were an experiment gone wrong in Brazil. South America had European honeybees just like we have. They brought African bees over from Africa because they're very prolific. They build lots of comb, and they thought they could cross these bees and develop a better bee. They escaped from their experiments wherever they were experimenting with them, and these Africanized bees, African bees, intermingle with honeybees, killed basically all pure honeybees, and have taken over and moved through South America and up through Central America and now are in southern US. They're really aggressive. People that take pictures of them wear bee suits. You'll wear a bee suit, but what they do is wherever there's a seam on the bee suit or the zipper down the front, they put duct tape because these bees are so aggressive that they will try to get in every seam. So they wrap themselves in duct tape besides using the traditional bee cover, veils and clothing. Very aggressive. They will kill animals. They do have problems with them down in Florida. Okay. If you get stung by a bee, you have your smoker lit. You want to smoke yourself because that bee sting will give off a pheromone that tells other bees to attack you because you're a predator. So you want to cover that pheromone up with your smoke. Only about 5% of the entire population is at risk of some type of anaphylaxis shock, and that's from food, drug, or venom. Venom is pretty small. It's 6 cases per million person years. And wasps are the most common cause of venom anaphylaxis. But if you think you are anaphylactic, you risk anaphylactic shock, or being allergic to bee stings, you should carry an EpiPen. They sell them. You can carry them. There's different stages to anaphylactic shock. Do I have it? No, the different stages of anaphylactic shock are, if you get stung the first time and you're allergic, you'll probably swell up and have difficulty breathing. You may have a very severe reaction, but it won't be life-threatening. It's the next time that you get stung, it'll be life-threatening. So, if you get stung and you have a severe reaction, see a doctor and get an EpiPen. All right, like I said, these things are inevitable. Severe reaction right here, see anaphylactic, difficulty breathing, swelling, rapid pulse, dizziness, vomiting. It's generally accepted that the number of stings that a healthy person can take and not have any toxic reaction is about 9 stings per pound. So if you wear 100 pounds, if you're 100 pounds, you can have 900 stings, which is a lot. You won't get that from a beehive. Here's what a bee sting will look like. You notice it gets red. You can see where the stinger went in. It may swell up in a little bit. When I get stung, it really burns for about 30, 40 seconds. It's just like somebody put a hot match out on me. After that, nothing. It doesn't swell up, doesn't get red, but the 30 seconds is pretty painful. So I try to avoid stings at all costs. Just a moment, please. I'm back. My dogs are creating a hassle here. Okay, this is pretty interesting. The health of bee colonies in the U.S. I find this so amazing. I'm intrigued whenever I see it, because you see folks with bee colonies in their yards all over the place. All the hobbyists that have bee colonies represent about 5% of all the bees in the United States. 95% of all the bees are operated or owned by about 5% of beekeepers. And those 95% of bees are on semi-trucks usually. We'll get to that in a second. But I just find that amazing that we don't have enough bees in the U.S. to pollinate everything we need pollinated. So we cart them around in semi-trucks. This is what happened to bees in the United States over time. In the 1950s, we had about 5.5 million colonies. Today, this is in 2007. Today, we have roughly 2 million. 2007, we had what, 2.5 million. You'll notice right in the early 80s, that's when mites invaded the United States from Asia. And you can see the dramatic drop in colonies from what, a little over 4 million down to 3.5 million. Because we didn't know anything about mites. We didn't know how to treat them. And you can see a gradual decrease over time from then. And part of that is because of diseases and mites, and part of it is because of our agricultural habits. We have food deserts. Iowa is a food desert for bees, basically. California is a food desert for bees. What I mean by that is we have lots of corn. Corn pollen doesn't do anything for bees, so there's no food for hundreds of thousands of acres that used to have flowers or pollinating plants that bees could use. We used to have a much more diverse plant life than we have today. It's commercialization is what it is. So this is, like I mentioned earlier on the first day, I showed the colony lost in Johnson County, eastern Iowa beekeepers of 160 colonies, and only about 35% or so survived. That's the problem we're having today. If you can see back in time, it used to, in the 70s and 80s, it was acceptable to have 10 to 15% loss per year. That was expected norm. Well, over time, that's growing. And as you can see in the 2000 teens, we were getting 40 and 45%. We're still getting close to 40% as of 2019 of bee colony losses. That's an unsustainable level for beekeepers. I mean, fortunately, hobbyists are helping, but we still have almost an unsustainable level of bees. And back in 2007, they started keeping these charts because there was something called colony collapse disorder. And there was a real fear by scientists and the government that all the bees in the United States would be destroyed and we would not have any pollinators because of this new phenomena that happened called colony collapse disorder. Iowa has traditionally, over the last several years, decade or so, couple decades, has traditionally been really bad for bees. As you can see over on the right side, the honey losses, the colony losses are above 60% in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Iowa. Minnesota is not much better. Not sure why, but it continues today. Like I said, this year, 60–70% of the hives in Iowa were lost over winter. Here's colony collapse disorder. But they discovered in 2007, 2008, and this was really scary. There were beekeepers, commercial beekeepers with 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 hives. That was their whole business. And they would have 7,000 hives in May, and in June they would have 1,000 hives left. And they had no idea why they were dying. There weren't any bees at the front entrances. The adult population just disappeared. There could still be a queen in the hive, but there was no adult bees. Other bees didn't rob the hive, and they couldn't figure out if it was Varroa or Nosema or virus or what. And in fact, that's when the Obama administration put a whole bunch of grants and money out into bee research. Before that, there wasn't a lot of bee research. The scientific community was very afraid that we were going to lose all our bees. That's when the University of Minnesota started what's called the Bee Squad in their agricultural department that studies bees. A whole bunch of universities really pushed research into bees, and that's helped quite a bit. This little culprit called the Varroa mite, and its real name, its actual scientific name is Varroa Destructor, is responsible for many, if not most, of the hive losses. This was the mite that was introduced into the U.S. From Asia in the early 80s. It didn't have an effect until the 2000s, though. It didn't really spread across the whole United States. And it carries like 22 viruses. And all the research has indicated there's a combination of viruses, of what this Varroa does to the larva, and then our intensified use of insecticides, herbicides in the farm fields have made a deadly combination for beehives. So, well, this is important in the sense that when you're inspecting a beehive, you have to think of this, and you'll also important about diseases and mites. What does it take to make a honeybee? So the queen lays an egg. That egg will remain an egg for 3 days. When she lays it on day 1, it will stand upright, just like this. It will stand perfectly straight up. By day 3, it lays flat, and then it becomes a larva. The worker bees feed the larva worker jelly that they make. The nurse bees make that. It's a larva for 6 days. So on day 9, between day 9 and day 10, the worker bees will cap over that cell with wax, and then it becomes a pupa. It stays a pupa and then emerges as an adult bee at day 21 for a worker bee. Queen emerges at day 16, and a drone, a male bee, emerges at day 24. But 95% of all bees take 21 days. And when you do an inspection, you're going to be thinking about, do I have eggs how much larva do I have, and do I have a lot of capped brood? Okay. So, what's important here? All right. Better husbandry, better, because we lost or almost lost all the bees in the U.S. in 2007 to 2009. The commercial beekeepers and the hobbyists that were really paying attention became much better at husbandry of their livestock. They just didn't put bees out; they watched them. They started to manage for the loss. So before, when we were expecting 15% loss of bees over the winter, and it was a shock when we had 40 or 50%. Now, beekeepers are anticipating that. They're trying to plan for how they can make more bees, and we're right on the cusp of sustainability, of being able to keep the number of bees that we have versus not having enough. We don't have enough commercial pollinators to start out with. We're losing a lot of natural pollinators like bumblebees, mason bees. A lot of the natural bees that we have, European honeybees are not natural to the U.S. They were imported, right? But a lot of our native bees species have, over the last several years, been reduced in population significantly, and science is worried about that. Because like right now, we're transporting our bees around to keep our food sources pollinated. So this Dr. Samuel Ramsey, he's on the internet. You can get videos from him. You can just YouTubes. He's a great speaker. He has some really interesting YouTubes about the Varroa mite. From 1900 till 2000, I don't know, 12 or so, 2015, everyone thought the Varroa mite sucked the bee's blood out. That's what the Varroa mite lived on. They lived on the the bee blood of a bee. He didn't believe that. He was a research student at a university, and he wanted to see what they really did. He did all this great research, and he discovered that what they do is they inject an enzyme into the bee that liquefies the fat body of the bee, and then they drink or they eat that fat body. It has nothing to do with the bee blood. And it took us, 100 years to figure that out. That changes all the way we want to treat Varroa mites, because we always thought they lived on bee blood, and now we find out they live on the fat body, which is the bee's liver. So you can imagine having a Varroa mite the size of your hand on your stomach, on your liver, sucking your liver out. That's what happens to a pupa with mites on it. And that's why they're so sick. So these are eggs that I mentioned. Hope you can see these. These are standing up straight. Day one. These were just laid by a queen within the last day. You can see there's quite a few of them here. Now, here you can see they've laid down, and they're full of a white glazy substance, moist substance over them, and they look good. They're white, pearly white. They have this white food on them that's called wicker jelly. You can see right here, there's an egg standing straight up, and there's a larva right next to it. All right, and then they get capped, and they look like the bottom right. Those are all larvae that have been capped. There's pupa in there. The reason there's so many holes is these bees are, in that particular picture, are hygienic, and if they detect a bee that's sick or has mites on it or whatever, or some problem, like right here, when you see them in a row, that could be a worm they're chasing. They'll pull those bees out and try to clean the hive. So here we have bottom left picture is larva. The bottom right picture is the larva with the bees before I blew them off and took the picture. I took 2 pictures. So these are all nurse bees taking care of that larva. Okay. Mites are really, really smart, female mite. All right. So just before the egg gets capped, I'm sorry, the larva gets capped on day 8 or 9. The mite, which is on a nurse bee or a forager walking around the hive, will jump off into the brood cell and bury itself underneath this larva, underneath that film, and it will squeeze down so you can't see it. And it puts a snorkel up to breathe. It has a snorkel. So it puts a snorkel up through the food, and that's how it breathes until it's capped. Once it's capped, like on the bottom right here, it emerges from its hiding spot. First thing it does is it pierces the larva, all right, to make a feeding hole for its young mites that it's going to make. It's a female, and then it defecates on the wall of the cell, of the honeycomb cell here, the wax cell. It defecates, and it defecates right next to the feeding hole. That way, its mites, the baby mites, know where to come by smell to feed. The first thing it does, that female mite lays a male mite. The male mite, the whole purpose is to fertilize the female mites that she's going to lay next. And that male mite will never survive outside of the cell. It never leaves the cell. It's the females that are the only ones that ever leave. So it lays the first egg, and then every 30 hours after that, it starts laying female eggs. It takes 75 eggs for that female mite egg to develop into a full-grown female. So it's an exponential rise of mites feeding off that poor larva. Average is there's 4 matings in a worker cell and 5 in a drone cell, a male cell, because the drones take 3 days longer. So the average, there's more mites on average in a drone cell than in a worker cell. That's important because later we're going to talk about one method of helping to reduce mites in a beehive is to get rid of drone cells once they're capped. Let's see. This Dr. Collision works for Bee Culture and the University of South Carolina, I believe. He writes articles. It's truly amazing. The worker bees will spend over the 9 days, they will spend 10+ hours on each larva. So that's why you need the demographics of a lot of nurse bees to take care of larvae, take care of brood. They visit each larva in the first 8 days 1,300 times a day to deposit food. On the last day, on the day just before they're capped, they keep putting food in there, and they visit that particular cell 3,000 times in that day. So they go make food and they come back, they deposit it. They make food, they come back and they deposit it. Keeping that larva fed. Well, the good news is half of the Varroa mites don't survive, but a lot do. So the average they figured out is about 2.5 mites per bee pupa, which is really bad. So now I mentioned that in drone cells, there's 5 matings in a drone cell. These mites are so smart, these female mites, is that they can tell the difference between a fertilized egg and an unfertilized egg. and they will go for the unfertilized egg if they are available. That's the drone eggs. And this William Booth is the one that called them Jacobsonian mites in 1904. And it wasn't until the year 2000 when they did DNA on these mites, they figured out that they weren't even related to the Jacobson mites. And that's when they got the name Varroa. The reason he did these experiments, and it was pretty interesting, he would take colonies of just drone, comb, and then colonies of fertilized, worker cells with mites, and he measured and calculated where the mites were going. And it turns out that if a mite has a choice, female mite, it will always go to the drone cell first. So he found out that 90 to 95% of all mites end up in drone cells first, and then after the drone cells are completely full of mites, they go over to the worker cells. So we can reduce the number of mites in a hive by constantly removing drone cells. And then, and if you have brood, this is pretty important. Let's see, where is it? 80% of all your mites are in cap brood. So if you see 1 or 2 mites, and there's 8 more someplace under the cap brood, and you'll never see them. But if you see mites on your bees, that hive is so overpopulated with mites, you're in big trouble. Mites are the #1 cause of hive failure. Okay, this is the old Varroa Destructor there. Wow, they do so many bad things, and I've had them in my hives. You see where it says some can't fly, DFW? That's called Deform wing virus. I've had them. I have pictures in here, I believe, of them. What happens is the wings shrivel up. It's a virus, and then so the bee can't fly when it comes out of when it emerges. So it's useless to the hive. And the only thing it does is carry that virus around and give it to other bees. Some bees can't perform any house duties, so they can eat, but they can't work. They're usually smaller in size. Like I said, 25%. It reduces their life 4 to 5 days. So a bee in the summertime will live about 40 days. So if you're knocking off 5 days from that, that's a significant portion of that bee's life. So it's the old chessboard problem. And you can have just a few mites in May, you'll have a lot more in June, and in July, you'll have an exponential growth. The chessboard problem was where if you put 1 grain of wheat on the first square, 2 grains on the second square, 4 grains on the third square, etc. By the time you're on the last square of a chessboard, because of exponential growth, there isn't enough wheat growing in the whole world to go on that last square. So it just exponentially propagates. Any questions? Apparently not. Okay, financial benefits. From a honey production is not a moneymaker in the United States. As a hobbyist, you can get good honey. You know where your honey's from, you know what's in it, and that's a plus. You give it to your neighbors, that's a plus. But it's a cottage industry. You can sell it at farmers market. It's not a moneymaker. We import honey. The big box stores import it at less than $1 a pound from Asia and from South America. And the problem with the ones from Asia is it may come from India or Vietnam or Thailand, but it's probably out of China somehow. and there's no regulations on insecticides or purity in China. What also happens to honey in your big box stores, and I tested some to find it, is that you won't find any pollen in it because they ultra filter it, so you can't tell where it's from. They heat it, they flash heat it so that it never crystallizes, so it looks pretty, and that ruins all the benefits of honey, all the active ingredients that are good for you. I have there's a big box store in the area that sells local honey, 5-pound jars with a little sticker that says, you know, local honey and approved or guaranteed or whatever. And I used to sell to some people like 40, 50 pounds of honey a year. And they said, oh, we're getting a lot cheaper at such and such place. And I thought, yeah, fine, you know, that's fine with me. I don't make that much or sell that much. But out of curiosity, I had my honey tested and I had that honey tested. I bought some. I have the results here. Our honey is from the flowers and pollen. They can identify where it's from the local area. You know. The honey from this big box store that's called local has South America pollen in it. So you can't have South America pollen in honey and call it local, but they do. The other thing it had in was diametris earth, and that only shows up when honey has been filtered to take out pollen, so you can't tell where it's from. There happens to be a big manufacturer in Iowa of honey, and the way that these big manufacturers do it is they buy barrels, you know, 50-gallon barrels of honey from all over, from Asia, from South America, from the United States, different suppliers, and they mix it all in a big vat, and they sometimes filter it, and they certainly flash heat it, and then they fill up their jars for the box stores. So you really don't know what you're getting. So that's one of the advantages to have your own honey, or to find some local producer that you know and get it from him. The money today for manufacturing in bees is pollination, big time, and producing bees for new beekeepers, hobbyists, and then bee supplies. Pollination is a huge moneymaker. All right. Well, here's where I mentioned honey is a commodity produced less than $1 a pound. One of the issues with the USDA honey standards, when you go and you buy honey at a store, the higher grade means it's clearer and brighter. So how do they get it clearer and brighter? They use ultrafilter and they use heat. That makes it longer shelf life, no pollen. And there was one study where 76% of the grocery store honey, and they did a lot of grocery stores, didn't have any pollen in it, which means it was ultrafilter. Here's a little test. Top 3 honey producing states in the United States for 7 years. The one state that's always number 1. It's one state that's been number 2 4 times, and one state's been number 3. Usually in a class, I have you raise your hand and tell me what they are, but we can't do that here, can we? So you can guess to yourself what the first state is. And I hope you guessed North Dakota, because that is the number 1 honey producing state in the United States every year. All the commercial honey keepers, you know, the 95% of those guys that have all the honey, they take their beehives in middle summer and they summer them in North Dakota and South Dakota. So South Dakota's number 2 4 times, and Wyoming is number 3 as far as honey producing states. I think I'll get to the reasons why, but in North Dakota, it's all sunflowers in the summer. Okay, I talked about this earlier a little bit. If you're going to buy honey, buy it from a local source. Never heat it above 100 degrees, 98.6 degrees. Anything above 105 degrees destroys an enzyme, all the enzymes in it. Those are what's good for your health. Raw honey has these amino acids and minerals and antibacterial, antioxidant, antimicrobial enzymes. In fact, raw honey is now sold in bandages that you can, expensive bandages that you can put on wounds. Honey has traditionally over time been used for medical purposes. It's been used on wounds a lot. It's used for burn patients. It's used for foot sores on diabetic folks. There's a special honey out of New Zealand that has this very high content of enzymes, a specific enzyme. And they sell that honey for, it's almost $40 a pound. That's used in medical facilities. But all honey has these enzymes. You destroy it if you heat it over 100, 104 degrees. One of the issues with crystallized honey is people don't realize that it's still good honey. It's just crystallized. It's not bad. A lot of producers that have natural honey, local guys, and they can't sell that crystallized honey, they will reheat it at more than 105 degrees to re-liquefy it. So it's still local, but they reheated it, and they just destroyed everything that's good in it. If you buy honey in July or June, that's last year's honey, because honey is always harvested in August for the most part. I mean, there's a few guys that will go out and harvest buckwheat honey in July or apple honey in, May, June. But for the most part, your general honey is all harvested in August. Crystallization is not bad. Our honey gets crystallized over the year, and actually my wife goes to farmer's market and sells it as crystallized honey. Some people prefer it. It doesn't drip. It's easier to spread. It has a little texture to it, and it's still honey. The key on all this is if you buy local honey, know your honey supplier, and talk to him and find out how he does things. Oh, here's that analysis. That's my report. And you'll notice that it's called blossom honey. And it has traces of South America pollen and diametris earth, which hints towards filtration. So it cannot be excluded. It also contains a share of filtered honey. It's a big box store in a local area that sells it as local honey. I talked about this already a little bit. There is no such thing as non-GMO, GMO honey versus organic honey versus insecticide or pesticide-free honey. You can label it that way. You can make sure you don't use pesticides or insecticides around your hive or in your hive. You can make sure you don't use chemicals in your hive. I don't use chemicals in my hive during the honey season. If I have to, because the mites or I have a disease, I take any honey I have off. I treat the hive, and that hive is done until the next year. But bees forage for their pollen and honey 3 to 5 miles. You have no idea where they're going to get it. And in this area, every farmer uses pesticides or herbicides on their corn, on their soybeans, and that has overspray into the woods. So there is no such thing as totally free insecticide honey anywhere anymore, actually, because they do carry that back. I have a bee, I have you call it, bird baths by my hives. And in the summer, oftentimes I fill it every day. Once a week, I spray it out. When I spray it out, sometimes it just froths up with foam, with bubbles like soap. Well, what is that? The bees have come back with some type of insecticide on their feet, landed, drank the water, and left some of that insecticide in the water. It's just something that happens. Medical uses, I said it's been used for wounds and burns. It's caused prevention of acid reflux, Mrsa infections. Mrsa is a virus that they can't treat, right? It's a flesh-eating virus. And they have found that in some cases, this honey from New Zealand will stop those Mrsa infections. And the biggest one that I get a kick out of is the American Medical Association has approved it for coughs as a cough syrup. And in fact, they're selling cough syrups now with honey in it. Instead of, I'm going to say NyQuil, but I can't think of the names of all the cough syrups that you could buy. Now you can buy them with honey too. Or you can just use plain honey. It's just as good for a cough syrup. I'm going to stop there because it's 9 o'clock. And then tomorrow or Thursday when we go, I'll go on with bee vision and things. Angela, do you have any questions so far?
No, but thank you so much. This is awesome.
Are you getting out of this what you hope to get out of it?
I am, yeah. Yeah.
I know I'm bouncing around on topics. I want to give you some background, and then I wanted to show you how bees, as livestock, what their concerns are and what you have to worry about to keep them alive, rather than just showing you, well, here's a beehive and you put a package of bees in it and hope for the best.
Right.
Anything from you, Alexis? No?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. So we'll end there for tonight. And Thursday we'll start up again. How's that?
Sounds
Thank
good.
you. All right.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
Ed. Have a good night.
You too.